really always tried to do that, right? Bring the science to the really practical side. I've always considered myself an applied scientist, and trying to do things that, whether it's research or something new and innovative, but keep my mind on, we can apply this tomorrow if it works, right? And so that's always kind of how I've approached things. And because of that, that big thing that we should all pay attention to, but maybe sometimes forget, is water. And so I've constantly, kind of keep water on my mind when I'm in a barn, when I'm in a facility of any type. One of the first things I do is just, casually checking nipples, checking, where the water is flowing, is things running the right way. Because sometimes it's the little things that are overlooked, but it's really important. And some of the work we've done is to, look at the simple things: flow rate, water quality, but looking at those things and just making sure that, are we doing them right? Are we following recommendations, or are the recommendations right? And so again, it's things that may be overlooked, but really practical stuff that are going to drive production efficiency, drive feed intake, and hopefully lower cost.
Swine it.
Welcome to our latest edition of Swine It podcast. I'm Jerry Purvis, your host, and today we have a distinguished guest, Dr. John Holt. John, welcome to the podcast today.
Well, good morning, Jerry. Thank you for having me.
Very good. John, I've known John for quite a while, and being both in North Carolina and NC State. So, but maybe some of our viewers don't know you quite as well. So, you take just a minute and just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, absolutely, Jerry. My name's John Holt. I grew up in Worthington, Minnesota, so I'm a native of Southwest Minnesota. Always grew up with a ag and farming background. My education is through University of Minnesota, at both my undergraduate and master's degree there. And that's where I started getting my love for research and the research process. And then it was time for a little bit of a change. So I moved to North Carolina at the time to do my PhD at NC State. After that, I've had a mix of both industry and academic positions. And then for the last 2 years exclusively, I've been running my own consulting business, Integrated Animal Nutrition, where I work with companies and producers in swine, poultry, and aquaculture, really just being that technical person for them, helping out with research studies, with production issues. And so that's really a lot of fun to get out there, work with different species, but also apply some of the same concepts of all species and helping others. And then a little bit of something new as well. Just a couple months ago, a partner of mine and I have founded a new company called Mintrition Technology, which is going to be based on a mineral supplement patent that we worked on at NC State and have decided to go forward with too. So lots of new things happening again for me.
Curious to discover if you can manage your animal data and teams work with the touch of a finger? Some of the best and largest pig farm holdings worldwide use cloud farms to collect and analyze data like never before. How? With the most advanced mobile app to collect data accurately and super fast. For breeding, farrowing, weaning, and finishing. Also, this is the easiest way to assign tasks to your team and motivate to work more efficiently. You instantly understand what gets done on time and what doesn't. So yes, you can manage your animal data with the touch of a finger.
Very good. John, like I said, as I mentioned, I've known you quite a bit, and one of my favorite professors at NC State, because you do have that, that background of academia and industry. So I thought, you always seem to be looking at things that really impact producers and really things that we can take and use every day, utilize to help us do our job better. So. Just thinking, also the big rocks. Sometimes we you're looking at things that really we should be looking at or talking about, and sometimes we don't. Maybe we assume too much, and but these are the big things that really impact our performance and our production at our facility. So let's just dive right in. What I know you're doing a lot of work with. We're looking at water quality and.
Sure. Yeah, Jerry, and I appreciate that because I that comment, because I've really always tried to do that, right? Bring the science to the really practical side. I've always considered myself an applied scientist, and trying to do things that, whether it's research or something new and innovative, but keep my mind on, we can apply this tomorrow if it works, right? And so that's always kind of how I've approached things. And because of that, that big thing that we should all pay attention to, but maybe sometimes forget, is water. And so I constantly, kind of keep water on my mind when I'm in a barn, when I'm in a facility of any type. One of the first things I do is just, casually checking nipples, checking, where the water is flowing, is things running the right way? Because sometimes it's the little things that are overlooked, but it's really important. And some of the work we've done is to, look at the simple things: flow rate, water quality, but looking at those things and just making sure that, are we doing them right? Are we following recommendations, or are the recommendations right? And so again, it's things that may be overlooked, but really practical stuff that are going to drive production efficiency, drive feed intake, and hopefully lower cost.
Yeah, so true. Totally 100% agree. The flow rates, you go in barns and, it seems like it's the thing. We worry about a lot of things that we're trying to find out. And it's really probably the things that we assume are being done right that aren't, is really what is killing us sometimes. So, flow rates, you go in barns and we assume that those animals are getting all the water they need. But that's not always the case, and trust but verify, I guess, is what you have to look at. But on water, what are some of the things on water that you? I know you mentioned water quality. What were some of the things you were able to find? Maybe things that you didn't expect as you dove into looking at water quality.
Yeah. So with water quality, one of the things we did was just kind of take a survey across the state, and I know some other places have done this as well, but other states, but looking at just some samples of the wide geographic location in North Carolina, and determining, do they fit the recommendations, and where are some of those mineral levels? We hear about iron a lot, and iron is a problem in North Carolina in a lot of our water. And so what are we seeing in the field, and how does that compare to what published recommendations might be? But then turning around and looking at production records on top of that, right? So do we see any difference in performance of a barn because of high levels of iron or other recommendations on water? Usually I was looking at the mineral levels. And really what we see, Jerry, is there's a wide variety out there in the facilities. Some meet the recommendation, that are out there. Some don't. But at the end of the day, it usually doesn't seem like it's affecting performance that much. The pigs are still drinking, the water's still being used, so we know it's going through, and we don't see any adverse performance based on those published recommendations.
So the pig is pretty resilient, it seems, and maybe we're making it a little more complicated. The animal figures out, unless we get out in a ditch somewhere with some issue, like you said, sulfur or something. The pig's going to be able to pretty much acclimate to that water source. And as producer, it's all about performance. We're looking for things that impact performance. So you think a lot of the recommendations probably need revisiting?
Yeah, I do, Jerry. That's right. I think a lot of those recommendations, and there's some that come out of Europe, and there's some that are come out of the U.S. They're fairly dated, which is okay. Doesn't mean we shouldn't look back at older work sometime. But I do think they're probably in need of some revision and maybe a little less tight on some of those especially mineral levels and some of those things where is it really something that's going to affect the animal? So I think that needs to be done. It's not a sexy science thing, right? Water. It's maybe something that is hard to get some funding for. But I think there's probably enough of us out there that would be willing to get together collectively and try to put those recommendations together. But I do think it needs some revision and mostly to just open it up a little, I think, and be a little less strict on some of those quality factors that might be published out there today. And then maybe some need some just revisit and see some of the science or like I said, a survey over time with some performance data behind it is not too hard to find. And that would be enough, I think, to kind of rewrite some of those recommendations.
Yeah, and that's in your practicality form. I think that's perfect because you get a sample back, you get your water tested, and you look at these things. Okay, this is out of the range. Well, do I need to worry about that? And in a lot of cases, you can't do anything about it. I mean, your water is where you're at, and it's what it is. There's some things you can impact, but so do you worry? Are we worried about something that's not maybe a big issue? So I think that's the more things we can cross off to worry about, we can spend more time worrying about the things that we can that do make difference. If we look at the flow rate, I know you mentioned, and maybe some of our viewers are not producers or maybe not really. How impactful is that to that intake? We know the animal grows because it eats, but how much impact is the water?
Yeah, and I think that's probably where we need to spend more time, in the barn, maybe less concerned about quality and more concerned about quantity, right? So are the pigs getting the amount they need? And so when we look at flow rates and some of those published, so we think about just look at nursery. For example, if you've got a nipple drinker in nurseries and the recommendation out there is probably 1 to 2 cups per minute, right, coming out of the nipple. So are you checking that, and are you checking every pen? Okay, because the pens at the front of the barn or the front of the room likely are different than the pens at the middle and at the far end of the room. So you need to take some of those simple things, cups per minute. Well, how many nipples do I have? How many pens are in that room? And is the flow even going into the room? So you might be able to check that in the pipe going into the room. Is that capable of handling, or is that even pumping the water in there that you need? And so, again, simple things that are going to drive intake, especially in a nursery situation where the first thing we want, wean them in and put them in a nursery or whatever facility, and the first thing you want is feed intake, but the first thing that's really going to happen is water intake.
Yeah. To your point, that wean pig is taking in a lot of milk, and that's where they're milking, and now they got to learn where a new source of water. That water is coming, and so they got to learn source. They're stressed. They're in, the social stress, and many times if you don't get that animal drinking, they're not going to eat. So it's imperative. A lot of them are dehydrated. That first day, they're just not taking in the amount of water. So yeah, it's pretty impactful. You were talking about flow rates. It's like we really don't notice that there's a water issue unless there's no water, and then we worry about that. We fix that problem, but we're probably limiting that pen or that house because that flow rate is not what it needs to be.
Yeah, and so I think that's true, and I think what most people will probably see first, Jerry, is why aren't they eating? Right? We notice a full pan of feed or a feeder that isn't going down as much as the other pens, and the first thing we think is, oh, they're not eating. First thing I do in that situation is check the water, and so usually even within a room, that one nipple might be plugged. You might have, for whatever reason, especially early nursery diets, a lot of milk content, a lot of specialty ingredients, those things get into a nipple and can plug it in pretty quick, right? The pig eats, the pig goes and drinks, and so those things happen. But you restrict water and you're going to restrict feed. We've done some of that. A data set I'm working with right now is we went in and we were looking at growth performance, but I also went in and checked the flow rates in every pen a couple of times throughout the nursery trial. And so what I did was leave the flow rates alone as long as they were within that recommended range. But we looked at feed intake, and then I'm putting that back on top of the flow rates. And I think what we'll find is even though all of them met the requirements of 1 to 2 cups per minute, the pens on the higher side, 2 or even higher, had a little bit higher feed intake. And so, while we look at the water quality and say, well, maybe we don't need as much focus there and need to rewrite those recommendations, some of these flow rates are maybe the one where we say, hey, we've dealt with these for a while, and maybe a little more or a little less here and there also needs some revisiting. But really paying attention to that flow rate and making sure it's the same in the barn, or if you're in a research setting and you're really paying attention, you want to record feed intake as an outcome, growth rate. Those flow rates really need to be the same so that we make sure it's not water intake restricting your feed intake and showing up as an outcome that you weren't expecting. And so really those flow rates can make a lot of difference, and we see that even again, recommendations are there, but if you're on the low side, you still might be restricting. And if you're on the high side, it's maybe too much.
Right. It all comes back to covering the basics, the making sure you're doing those things right first. So, yeah. Now, you were talking while we're on flow rates. How about to a lactating sow? How important is that?
Yeah, so there's another big one, and anybody that's had me walk a barn with them knows in a sow barn I'm always checking nipples, and maybe get barn managers cringing sometimes. But if the expectation of that sow, we're trying to get her to eat 15 pounds or more feed per day during lactation, and maybe upwards of 20 during peak lactation. The recommendation out there is 4 cups a minute. That might be, 16, 10 gallons a day or more. And so that's a tremendous amount of water for a lactating sow. And, sometimes I grab these nipples that are just barely trickling, and that sow is not going to get the amount of feed she needs with that amount of water. It's got to be easy for the sow to get. And it's got to be readily available for her.
Yeah. So really, her milk output is really related to her water intake and being able to consume enough water. How would you compare to a dairy cow, a lactating sow, as far as milk output?
Yeah. So on a per pound basis, I probably get the numbers wrong if I try and remember them off the top of my head. But on a pound for pound basis, that lactating sow is really producing as much, if not more, than a high producing Holstein dairy cow. And so we think about a dairy cow consuming a bathtub full of water a day. We know that we've got a lactating sow that's got to consume a tremendous amount of water for her body weight as well. And so any restriction, whether that's in the individual sow, or again, trying to remember how many sows are in that farrowing room? Is the flow going into the barn, into the room, even enough that if all the nipples are going at the same time, is there enough water coming into that room to meet the needs of every sow? And so those are the little things that we have to remember when you look at water. It's not always just the individual sow either. It's have we taken the time to look at what's water going into the room, and is that enough to cover every sow if she wanted to drink at the same time?
Right. Switching gears a little bit, you've done some work in minerals. Maybe talk a little bit about some of your work there with minerals.
Sure. So this kind of goes into our new venture a little bit, but for a while now, I've been really interested in the antimicrobial properties of zinc oxide, and we know that as regulations keep coming down the pipeline, we've been limited on the use of some of our antimicrobials, and for a time that probably increased the amount of pharmacological levels of mineral and especially zinc. It's been known for a while that zinc oxide is a great replacement for antibiotics, especially in nursery pig diets. And so that practice really took off. And now we're seeing the environmental side come back on zinc and potentially some other minerals as well. So we've really been focused on, the best way, how can we replace those high levels of zinc oxide? And so whether that is different forms of zinc that we can try and get into the lower gut, or ways to encapsulate minerals to get them a little bit more targeted approach to where they're needed. We know that like zinc chloride, for example, is highly soluble. So the reason zinc oxide works so well is it's not very soluble and not very well absorbed in the system, so it stays in the gut and has its cleansing effect. So zinc oxide, a different approach, when those mineral forms are so soluble, they might not provide the antimicrobial benefit the same way. So really just figuring out how to target that mineral to the animal.
Right. Now, you mentioned an encapsulation. How is that going to improve that product or that zinc and the reaction that the animal that it has in that lower gut? How does this encapsulation? Maybe explain that a little. Maybe some reviewers maybe don't understand.
Yeah, so in encapsulation and works in other species as well, but really the concept behind any type of encapsulation is you make that product less absorbable early in the digestive tract, right? So when you've got a mineral source, once it passes through the stomach, hits the small intestine, that's typically where a lot of the nutrient absorption happens, right? So when you get the highly soluble minerals like the chloride forms, those are easily digested and absorbed in the small intestine. A product like zinc oxide that's less soluble continues to pass. If you get high levels of it, it's going to pass to the lower gut. And the lower gut is really where the bacteria and the infections can occur, and that's really the spot where we're trying to reduce the amount of bacteria. So the idea behind encapsulation is, can you encapsulate a product so you can get by that first round of absorption of the small intestine? Maybe not 100%, passing, but enough of it passing. Meet the animal's nutrient requirements, pass the rest to the lower intestine, where now the encapsulation has broken down enough that the product, whether it's mineral, whether it's other nutrients, are released from the encapsulation in the large intestine, where they can have its intended effect. So in the case of zinc, can you get enough zinc pass through the small intestine absorption released into the large intestine where it can have its antimicrobial effect. And so the larger part of that is hopefully if you can encapsulate a more digestible form of the mineral, you're needing less, right? So you think about zinc oxide that goes in at 3,000 parts per million to get enough delivered to the lower tract. Encapsulation, hopefully you can deliver less. You don't need as high a level and still get it into the large intestine to work the way it should. And so then the outcome of that is you're still meeting the antimicrobial needs of reducing those pathogens, but you're excreting much less out the back end that we'd have to worry about environmentally.
Hey, and that's a good point. As a producer, E. coli is a pathogen that we struggle with, particularly in that wean pig, and zinc oxide is a great tool, as you said. Antibiotics, but we don't have antibiotics. We're moving away from those, and now we're moving into, as we see in Europe, their levels of zinc. They can only use 200? Is it 250? Nothing. Not a level that's going to help us. So it sounds like this product maybe will give us, or this type of technologies will allow us to get the same performance out of the zinc, but use less.
Yeah, that's the hope is that we're more efficient with the amount that we are using, right? And so for us, and encapsulation is out there, right? There's other products that use a different type of encapsulation. So it's out there, and so that's good. I mean, it's just really finding those ways that we can make the animal more efficient, make the nutrients we're providing more efficient. As we know, it's going to keep coming, right? You mentioned Europe. They've put a hard stop on that pharmacological use. And when you look around, some of those things tend to work their way over here in terms of regulation. So we've got to be on the lookout. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And you think about other minerals that might benefit from that too, thinking about that targeted approach or slower release. There might be some opportunities, and maybe it's not swine, maybe it's other species or even other industries that can benefit from a slower release of a nutrient. I'm thinking about crops and things like that you are providing nutrients today in the soil or right to the animal, to the plant. And some of these technologies might be able to help all that be more efficient with the targeted approach.
Yeah, I agree. It's really about being able to deliver these to get the same response, but being able to deliver and to be more efficient with our resources and with these trace minerals like we're talking about, and take away that environmental issue that we have using these farm levels of stuff. But and that kind of leads us into, I know you and I talked before, is sustainability, and trying to figure out how do we manage these resources as even as you're saying, water. Water is probably going to be a resource we don't think about. We always think we got plenty of water, but that's probably going to be a bottleneck going forward with the growth. And so yeah, maybe you've done some work looking at sustainability and looking at maybe speak a little bit about sustainability and how we improve that.
Yeah, I think everybody's trying to figure out the needs for that, and certainly companies are aware of it and trying to look, and that's a good point. It's environmental sustainability, it's business sustainability, it's animal welfare sustainability. There's a lot of different buckets there, but these two things definitely fit, right? Water is certainly an issue. I think we've seen some of that already. You look out west, you look to California, they're dealing with water issues and can, anytime we see areas of a state or the country that are going to be shut off from water use at certain times a day or certain times a year, that's certainly a problem for agriculture, and livestock production for sure, that you can't just turn the water off on a dairy barn or a sow farm. So I think those are real issues that we see going forward. Are we going to be able to place livestock production, or are they going to have to move into areas where we know we've got continued resource use? And I think on one end, is there enough water? On the other side, is there enough land to meet potential environmental regulations on these minerals that we're using, or other components, even manure itself? We tend to think about nitrogen, phosphorus. Most of our recommendations or our regulations are around phosphorus. So we got to look at these areas, and that has to come into the sustainability question.
Yeah. So it's almost there's a lot of we look at water. I think in our company we started looking at water, and so some of these things make sense, financially, but if we start controlling, if we can use less resources and still get the same production, then we're more efficient and we're more financially viable. So they kind of go together. We've all got to. And I think a lot of non-farmers don't realize most farms or production facilities are made up of family farms. Many of them have lived on this land for generations, and they want to leave that land to their children in better condition than when they inherited it. So I think there's a real. Sometimes we think farmers are out here trying to. Farmers are concerned about sustainability, but they also are concerned they have to be financially viable. So, the technologies, I think that's where the need is to find these new technologies to help us become better stewards of our land. And I always like to ask, because I know you're a big thinker, you're thinking about outside the box. What do you think, your crystal ball, what do you think are some of the technologies or things that we might see in the future coming down the pipe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll make one comment too on that sustainability that you mentioned, though, Jerry. Remember, our industry, livestock for sure, are one of the first recyclers, right? Like we've been doing this sustainably for a long time, and using byproducts, using things that would end up in a landfill and turn them into feed and food for people. And so that's a message we need to continue to tell that story. But when I look at, look at what technologies are coming, another thing I've spent a little bit of time on and still very intrigued because it's new and it's coming out there. But when we start thinking about, and it goes into this idea of targeted nutrition, I think, as well. But really the use of sensors and artificial intelligence in the barn, right? Because if there's one thing I think there's a shortage, and we know this has been a problem for a while, but there's a labor shortage in our industry. And a little bit of that, I think, is that gap of people don't grow up on the farm anymore. And so it's not as easy to see yourself in a farm when you think about where you want to work. But I think the use of sensor technologies, and it doesn't have to be cameras, right? But sensors, cameras, things in barns that are going to reduce the amount of hours that we might have to spend in a barn. And I might be able to sit here while I'm talking to you and have my other computer monitor that's given me a reading of what's going on in the barn. And I'm 30 miles away or 100 miles away or maybe across the ocean and can be checking in on my barn. But then, getting enough data from sensors and cameras that we can start training AI and things in the barn to warn us when we really need to do something. And I think that can go down to the pen level, Jerry, and maybe someday the pig level. When we think about RFID tags and the ability to tag an animal so that we can follow that animal through the day and know it's been at the feeder, it's been at the water, it's moving around, and then a computer in the barn saying, yep, all these pigs are fine, or an alarm that's going off and saying, you know what, Jerry, pig number 500 in pen 50 doesn't seem right today, and we might need to check that out. And maybe to the level of saying, this is a farm manager that needs to be there, or call the vet, right? Just get the vet right to the farm because it's a serious thing that's happening. I think those tools are going to really help in terms of labor. And I think it's going to really help when we talk about targeted nutrition too, growth rates and sensors that can weigh the animals from a camera. We've got the technology to say, hey, this pen is reaching this weight. It's time to change the diet, but we're going to leave the other pens alone because they're growing a little slower. And so that, again, that targeted approach to a pen or even an individual animal someday, I see it as a real benefit of using the technology that we've got today and making it better.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It seems, just in the last 5 years, we look at the technological advances and how fast things are changing. And, it seems maybe our colleagues or maybe our industry is not quite as on the curve as the poultry guys, but I think it's slowly. We got a lot of old. Myself. I'm not real old, but there's probably a lot of farmers that are older than I am. And just really are hesitant about technology and putting that in. We're scared of things we don't understand, I think. So yeah, but what do you think? So if it seems as technology, you're saying technology is where we're going to learn more about and use that precision, being able to, apply that resource, that feed, be it maybe even behavior, understand how the animal's behavior, maybe is that an indicator that animal's, getting ready to be sick or something. Or we notice that animal is now, because you walk in a barn, you're there 5 minutes, but that pig's in there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's really hard to me. I think if we find something that can monitor that behavior and like you said, using AI, is being able to be in front of that pig and maybe treating that pig or separate, if he's fighting or whatever. So yeah, what do you think are the walls that are keeping us from really moving quicker on some of this technology?
Yeah, so you mentioned the poultry side uses some, and the dairy side, of course, right? When you talk about automating some of the things they've done, dairy's been at it for a long time. It's a little bit different animal, though, right? You've got that dairy cow can have its individual tag and a little easier to trace in a barn and stays to themselves, where pigs are gonna be curious and trying to rip out tags. I think that's probably where it starts, right? A little bit. And that's based on the behavior that you mentioned. Hard to put a good tag on a pig that we're going to be able to follow it around all day long. But that technology is there. The other thing we've got, we got to remember at the end of the day, the processors are taking ears and everything else, right? Everything but the oink is used out of that pig. That's what I like to say, right? And so there's a market for that ear, and do we have a market for it if it's got a tag in it? And so we do have to think about some of those things. Cost is still there in that technology. I think especially on the tag side, we've got to figure out. I think we've got to figure out how to get that way to that way to tag the individual animal, that's probably still keeping us a little bit held back. But it's also, Jerry, I think one thing, and I can ask you, you've got PigChamp or whatever data record keeping you use. When's the last time you really sat down and studied that? And so for
yeah, that's a perfect point, because you get all this data, and sometimes we're drowning in data. We've got data, but what we need to know is what is the data how to read and interpret that data, and what is it telling me? Is it telling me that so I can go and figure out, okay, this is an issue, and now I can go to the barn level and say, okay, what's causing this? Why is I know my performance is going down, so I know I've got an issue. The data's telling me that, but how do I fix that? Where is it telling me where the problem is?
Yeah, so I think that's where the technology can help. Maybe what's limited today, right, is we've got all this data. Admittedly, we're not spending the time we need because we don't have time, right? There's not enough time to study all that data. So that's where I think AI comes in, or, that side of it, to say, funnel that data into something that's not just storing it, right? I'm not just storing data. I'm analyzing that data and giving you an answer, right? And so I think that's where we'd like to see it. And still what needs to happen is that takes a lot of time to train a computer to say, oh, I'm seeing this and that's bad, right? Or this is good. These are normal. And so this is okay. And I think that's probably the step that we really need to get to. And it's going to take some time, but the training of the system to know when something is out of line and send that message, I think is what it needs, because we're all collecting a lot of data, but is it really being used as effectively as it can be? Probably not in most situations, but I think that's where the technology can get us, is analyzing that data, making decisions, not just storing and giving you an output that you still have to, read and think about, okay, what does this mean? Let's have the computer at least get us the first couple steps,
100% agree. I always use an analogy. It's like, you have a baseball game, and the next day you get the box score, and you see how many, you know who won. They scored 5 runs. This team scored 4 runs. But what we need is could I have changed the pitcher, in the third inning? When should I took him out? Maybe he wouldn't give up. The next pitcher doesn't give up those runs. So it's identifying those interventions, before, and getting, being a little more proactive. So I 100% agree. When is that sow? We need to take her out of the herd. When is she? What's happening? You have a mortality. Something happened prior to that. So understanding, when we can get these interventions in.
Yeah, and a really good one. And there's systems out there that are used already, that are recording behavior of the animals, recording water intake, recording environment. And I've seen some of those systems, and a really interesting output that I looked at. And this again is, once there's a problem, then we looked at the data, right? So what's the data tell us after the problem? But it was really interesting, Jerry, because we had a situation where in a facility, the ventilation wasn't working that well. A fan, had shut off overnight, and it didn't get caught probably until mid-afternoon the next day. And so the sensors in the barn for ammonia started to trigger, right, and tell us we had higher levels of ammonia than we should have. And when we look back at the data, and knowing that this, fan was off for that last, 12 hours, but maybe wasn't working right for a couple days before, and I happened to look at the water intake in that room. And about the time that fan shut off, 12 hours later, water started to increase. Water intake in the whole room started to increase. And it's something we didn't notice. We weren't watching water intake data. But when we went back on it and looked, this barn got high levels of ammonia in the room, and we had water intake spiking as well. And so just another one of those kind of curious things. We got ammonia levels back down. We got a new fan in. We got things up and running. Ammonia comes down. Water intake almost drops, right back to normal immediately when the air quality is correct. So the water intake taking a little jump was a sign that something was wrong before we noticed the ammonia levels getting too high in the room. And so it was really interesting, again, just to see where little things, water intake, how much are they drinking? A little thing was telling us something else was going on in the barn. And so that's, again, why I think, not even us humans were catching that one. So the data, the sensors, plugging into a program that can tell us, hey, your water's starting to take off. And I think there's data out there that would suggest water intake starts to go up for a number of different problems. But again, seeing that in real time and then making a decision before the problem actually occurs, I think that's where it's got to get us.
Yeah, I agree. It's to use an analogy again, we got the box score. We know what the score is. We're trying to change the score so our team wins. And so, yeah, we gotta have some stuff in real time so we can make decisions and then hopefully have a more positive outcome at the end. So I 100% agree. And maybe in my lifetime, I won't see it in my lifetime, but I think it's fast track coming. And we're definitely going to have to embrace it if we're going to be viable. And it speaks to all your, like you said, the sustainability, trying to, we've got to feed better. We've got less resources. We've got to reduce our carbon footprint and just, trying to preserve the environment, the planet we live on, and trying to be sustainable. So, and I think, like I said, farmers, like I said, are concerned about this. Many times people look at us and like we're not the evils that we are made out to be. Sometimes we really care about our animals. We care about our environment, and we want to do the right thing. So,
yeah,
it's time for our famous three.
A worldwide leader in animal nutrition, Adiceo's portfolio of products includes methionine, the full range of vitamins, enzymes, organic selenium, probiotics, mycotoxin management strategies, and palatability products. With such a diverse offering, Adiceo supports its customers with a broad range of expertise, tools, and services to help them maintain a competitive advantage. Adiceo, fueling predictable profits. To learn more, visit Adiceo at www.adiceo.com.
You and I talk all day, probably. We get together, but got 3 questions we always ask our guests.
Okay.
And I know you have some interesting answers. But first question is, what is your favorite resource that you use?
Well, I will maybe take an unconventional approach here too, because I am not too humble to ask questions, and so I think a good thing to do for anyone out there is kind of have your own close group of directors, as I say, right? And so if something's really on my mind, Jerry, I've got a former professor of mine that I call on. I've got some industry friends that I call on, and I've got a personal friend that doesn't know anything about our industry that is always happy to bounce ideas, right? So I have some people that when things are getting me, and it might be an animal science question, it might be a personal question, whatever, but having people that you trust is a great resource. And so I try and use people a lot.
100% agree. Yep. And it may be overlapping into our next question, but yeah, it's we're only as smart as the people is our network for sure. Yeah, we I got people that I can call, and if I got a question, it might take me a day or two to find, or a week to find the right answer, but they can tell me in 2 minutes.
That's right.
So
yeah.
And so I may not even find the answer myself. So I've tried to be around people that are really smart. I think I found that works pretty well, and I don't have to be smart then. I can just, as long as I know smart people. So,
that's right. That's right.
So I guess it goes to our next question. Looking back in your career, what are and it may be plural, maybe the most influential people that you had, person that you had in your life that helped you in your career?
Yeah. Great question there too. Well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind, certainly my parents were always motivating me to keep going. My dad is the one who made me spend hours in the hog barn. So, he gave me that first kind of lesson in raising pigs, and then, they just pushed me to keep going. Dr. Lee Johnston has been one at Minnesota. He was my master's advisor, and he's been first a professor, then a mentor, and now a friend. And that's someone who I think career-wise has been very influential for me and reminding me to be practical, I think. And so that was always a good message. But those are folks that really shape me, and I'm sure I'll miss a lot of people when I answer that question. But off the top of my head, those are the first two. And yes, that is one of those people I call on when I have questions.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, last question. What are the traits or characteristics you think that define successful people in our industry? And we could say producers, or researchers like yourself. What do you think are those traits, characteristics those people invariably all possess?
Yeah, I think to be successful in the industry and probably in other areas, too. The first one is being humble, right? I learned early on, as I mentioned, you shouldn't be scared to ask a question, and you shouldn't feel like you're the one that knows it all too, right? So and that, even working in the industry, a few people I've worked with and good mentors there, one of the first things working with a group of nutritionists, don't bang your head against the wall when you can ask somebody. So swallow your pride sometimes and admit you don't know and ask, and instead of taking weeks to get it done. So I think that's important. I think you absolutely today have to embrace change. I think to be successful anymore, think outside the box, however you want to state that. But I think you have to be willing to embrace change, and because it's always coming. It's always coming in our industry. We're going to see more of it. To me, change happens even faster now with technology and advancing things. So you have to be willing to embrace change. And the last one, I think, to be successful is you got to have a little grit. You got to be able to stick with it, right? Some days you're going to fail, and you have to be willing to get out of bed the next day and go right back at it. And so that takes, I think, some grit to keep going.
Yeah. And all those are totally agree. And those are definitely things that, we've got to have that vision to keep looking and for better ways of doing what we're doing, and not get complacent. And that's why I like, you would define all those. I think, I know you're humble, but I think you define a lot of that. You're continually looking, but you're practical. You know it's got to, at the end of the day, it's got to be something that makes sense that people can use and work in their barns, or if it makes their life better, if it makes the animals' life, better, we improve the welfare. If we do all these things, we got to we're doing what we need to be doing. We need to just be constantly not selling for status quo. But I like your practicality and some of the things that we reflect on sometimes that we don't maybe spend enough time and that we overlook many times. But I appreciate you being on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure, and always a pleasure to talk to you and bounce and hear things. And a good luck on your new venture here, and I'll be looking forward to hearing more what comes out and seeing the results.
Thank you again, Jerry. I appreciate the time, and look forward to talking again soon.